All right, parents, welcome back to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we bring you hope, answers, and drug-free help for kids struggling with chronic health challenges. With this podcast, we don't just look to educate and inform you and give you information. We empower you. We're going to partner with you to get you the action steps you need to get your child healing, no matter their diagnosis, no matter their age, no matter the severity. We know that kids can heal and they can do just absolutely tremendous, transformative things, especially when we get into healing their nervous system. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode, as we do on every single episode. But this one's going to be quite unique. This one's going to be wildly personal. And it's where so much of the hope, so much of our just pure mission really began for our special guest today, my wife, Kristina, and I. So Kristina is joining us to really set the tone in the context of how powerful this discussion, this interview that my wife and I had is going to be for you and your family and your kiddos. See, Kristina is, like all moms out there, just an absolute rock star, just someone who will do and does do anything and everything for their kids. And so what we faced with what we like to nickname him now, our Chiro miracle man, Oliver, was the worst of prognosis. But we went through 6 weeks of, HE double hockey sticks, I guess you would call it. And yes, that's a corny dad way of saying that word. Oliver went from one hospital to another in a helicopter. He was life flighted to a level 3 NICU. He had 3 surgeries there. He had just mountains of medications he needed there. He spent 6 weeks there. He wasn't supposed to make it out of there. You'll hear in the episode that Oliver only had a 20% chance of living to age 1. And if he did, the Harvard-trained neurologist, the best supposedly in understanding neurology, brain damage, and all the things that Oliver went through, the prognosis we were given for Oliver was that he had a 99% chance, so basically a guarantee, right? It would have just sounded too harsh to say 100%, of cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism, and the toughest of neurological challenges. So I've alluded to Oliver's story in previous episodes, but this is the one where we really sit down, and it's really raw. It's really emotional. It takes me back. Oliver is now 14 years old and thriving. Let me get the good news out of the way here as well. He defied all medical odds. Medicine saved his life. We are eternally grateful to the surgeons, the surgeries, the medications, the machines that saved Oliver's life. But we are eternally, unbelievably grateful and motivated and in action for the rest of our lives to get you, other families, other parents, other kids, this information about neurologically focused chiropractic that gave Oliver his life back. It restored the function of his brain. It was the catalyst and the spark that got his brain to heal, to restore from the damage it went through. And that not only saved Oliver's life and got him, past the age of 1, as they were talking about, but got him into a life where he is thriving, a straight A student. He had cardiopulmonary challenges in addition to his brain damage, and so he couldn't breathe as an infant. That was where the hypoxic damage to his brain went. And he now wins cross-country races because our guest interview here, Kristina, is a marathon runner and the endurance athlete of the family. So he has adjustments, yes, but that DNA and endurance capacity as well. He is a miracle, and you're going to see and hear and feel in this episode what fuels our mission, where our certainty really came from. I was already on this track to be a neurologically focused pediatric chiropractor, but when God sent us our miracle son, Oliver, that was the absolute galvanization of our mission, and we will never stop relentlessly reaching as many kids as possible because of what we've experienced, miracles as parents as well. So the reason that this podcast is named Experience Miracles is because we have, and we've helped thousands of other families experience miracles as well. And it's these stories that get us the context and the understanding of the different scientific elements and information we need to take action upon to get miracles for your kiddos as well. So just a quick little introduction to Kristina. She is the toughest, most incredible woman I have, and I promise you this, will ever meet. She's my best friend. She is the just engine by massive, productive, mission-driven engine behind everything we do, whether it's our practice here in the Chicago area, PwC Chiropractic, our mission to train and mentor and get other pediatric chiropractors up to the level they need to be to take care of tough cases like seizures and autism and cerebral palsy. And then she's just obviously the rock and everything to our entire family. And she fuels this PX Docs mission alongside me as well. So I can't say that sitting down, we call these our green chair series. If you ever want to watch this, once we kick it on, you'll see this is it's the audio from an incredible video that we do. We have a bunch of them with other parents and even some of the patients, some of our teenage and young adult patients like Cole and Francesca. We call it the Green Chair series, and you can find these on our YouTube page. If you just go to YouTube and you search PX Docs, you'll find those, including this episode. But just last thing I'll say is, I can't say I really enjoy, I'll just be extra personal and raw with you as I wrap up this intro. Didn't enjoy this. As much as Oliver's story is now my story and God's journey for us, those of you that have been through these challenges as a parent or are still living in them right now, it's not a fun story to tell. It's not a fun story to tell. There's not things that you enjoy when you get into the details. You'll experience and hear a lot of the raw anger I had with the medical system, the frustration I had, but then you'll also get to the joy, the absolute unbelievable experience and things we found and experienced when Oliver left the hospital, seizure-free, MRI showing his brain damaged, healed, EEGs clear, off all medications, and the whole medical team looking at us like they had literally just experienced a miracle that they couldn't explain. We can explain it, and we do on this episode and this podcast and everything we do. So get to know Miss Kristina. Get ready to get to know our miracle man, Oliver. Without further ado, here is my wife and I sharing Oliver's story together.
Throughout my entire pregnancy, I prepared in every way possible. I just truly never pictured myself in a NICU. I never pictured myself with a baby in a helicopter being life-flighted. I never pictured so many of those moments, and I think nobody ever does. I mean, anytime you ever meet a mom that's going through that storm, you'll never hear her say that she saw it coming.
I think Oliver's story began for us with a wonderful expectation and, excitement. And it began during, obviously, the pregnancy for Oliver was a ridiculously busy, fast sprinting season of life because we had Addison, we had our 1-year-old, and we had our, baby number one. And shortly after baby number one, as we sometimes will look at it, was the practice and starting PwC and taking care of families in that way. So it was just so busy. It was the blessing of being busy. And then we had Addison's pregnancy, Addison's labor and delivery, Addison's whole entire first year plus there of health was so magical and so beautiful and so perfect. There was no perfect storm elements to it that I think in simple terms, the expectation I had with Oliver was, round 2 and it would just be easy. Yeah, I think honestly, preparation is a word we love. It's a word you love. And so, I don't know of anybody who was more prepared for a natural birth and a beautiful, healthy baby and all the desired positive outcomes whatsoever. I mean, I remember the birth plan being multiple pages, right? And it was my job to print that sucker off and bring it along and have the midwife and have the doula and have the team all prepared and be your best friend and be your advocate. And so I would say we were as prepared as could be with zero preparation for what actually happened. Just pure shock. If I remember the beginning after his traumatic birth, I just remember honestly, I remember the drive. They took him from the helicopter from the first hospital. They took him in a helicopter to the second hospital. I remember fighting hard at first to want to be on the helicopter. because I had been in the ambulance that got him there to that first one. And I just wanted to adjust him, and I just wanted to protect him, and I just wanted to have my hands on him, and I just wanted to be connected to him. And so I remember wanting to be in the helicopter and was not allowed in the helicopter. And I wasn't with you during this conversation with Oliver. He was in a room, you were in the waiting room, and I was fighting hard to get into the helicopter. And that was when he had his first seizure, and the blood coming out of his nose from the hypoxic injury and the brain injury and the oxygen issues.
When Oliver was first born, he came out and he was completely blue, but we just thought he just needs to take his first breath. We never thought it would cascade into what it did. And we, right away, Tony flipped him.
He was not just blue. He was
lifeless.
And so there was no sound, no movement, no breathing, no nothing. His birth was crazy fast. That was Oliver's birth. He was delivered, shot out like a rocket on Memorial Day of 2009. And so he shot out like a rocket and landed on the bed because he went so fast. The medical team was just not ready for that quick of a delivery from you. And I literally watched him land on the bed, head and neck flexed. So brainstem, cervical injury, everything I had studied, but just knew. And he wasn't breathing, full blue, full cyanotic. So I remember Deb helping me get you turned around, umbilical cord still attached. And I made his first adjustment to just make something start. And it did.
And it did.
It did.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I was just,
his first breath.
It was tiny and it was little, and he kicked out just a little bit of fluid and he took his little first breath.
Yeah.
And then he had you. And then we tried to get him to rebuild. We tried to get him to latch and tried to get him with you and knowing that you would be his source of strength and that.
Yeah.
And he started going.
One of the things I remember most is that he sounded like he was drowning. When he initially took that first breath, you could tell that he just wasn't really getting air, and it sounded like he was drowning. And that's one of the sounds I look back on, and I get so mad at myself that I didn't know. That I didn't know that he needed more, that he wasn't okay. The thing that is so different in Oliver's story is that he had chiropractic from that very first moment. And that's truly the only thing that sets his story apart from every family that we met in the NICU. Every baby that was in the NICU, every baby that was in the pods, the only thing that Oliver had that set him apart. Because I bet all those other moms took great care of themselves during pregnancy, thought they did everything right, envisioned this beautiful start to creating a life and, adding to their family. The only difference we had in Oliver's story is we had chiropractic from the start.
And so my favorite part for us, for Oliver, is that he had chiropractic, and it absolutely was the singular, clearest, easy for me to explain scientifically difference point that he had to have the outcome that he does, which is so full of life. But the hardest part of that is we knew the whole time it injured his nervous system. You could put it in whatever anatomical term you want. They all come together. He injured his neck. He injured his brainstem. He had a hypoxic injury, so lack of oxygen to his brain. He had CSF flow issues, so his brain suffered brain damage. Our word within that is subluxation, but he suffered right in front of us the thing that I had spent the last 2 years studying every single day. He suffered a brain damage, perfect storm, traumatic birth. I just knew that we could fix that. And so the whole time, it was like we were running down these 2 tracks every day in that hospital, praying and trusting that the medical team would fix the issues they needed to fix with his pulmonary hypertension, with his heart-lung challenges. And they did, with the most amazing surgeries and the most amazing of medications. And every single day he got adjusted multiple times per day. Eventually we did come together and we said, let's get out of here. We have to get him out of here. I remember pictures of child after child and story after story. And the stories all were of kids with severe disabilities and challenges. And they were beautiful stories of parents embracing the challenge, embracing what they went through, and making life the best with it. But then from that, we just went to work. We just adjusted him every day, and you loved him every day. And then we got out of there.
Yeah.
So at first, he was at a hospital, which was a level 3 NICU, but not as equipped as where he would end up on his third day of life at Lutheran General. And he was the sickest baby in both of those hospitals. And those were the words that they would use to us. So he had persistent pulmonary hypertension, so PPHN. The first hospital, in order to try and, knowing that there was oxygenation challenges from the birth, to try and prevent brain damage, there was all brand new research. It wasn't really well researched at all. It was just kind of this new method. They did whole body cooling. So for the first couple of days of his life, one of the hardest things we had to deal with was our baby was just there in the isolette, freezing cold. And so they kept his body temperature cold, which was a huge contraindication.
While in a medically induced coma.
And having pulmonary hypertension. Because when you're cold, you constrict. So the number one thing he needed for life, life-sustaining, basic functions with heart and lungs, was to open up. Because his birth was so fast, he didn't have that first kickstart, and those things weren't working. And so, as simple as that sounds, that's what he needed first. And so, because they couldn't get it working on his own, they transferred him via ambulance to Lutheran General here in Chicago. And on the ambulance ride, so they scheduled him for ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, heart-lung bypass surgery. And on the ambulance ride, because he had to warm up for the surgery, they couldn't do the surgery cold. He got so much better so fast, they almost didn't do ECMO because his body started to respond and his own healing mechanism started to kick in. But ultimately, they still decided he had so much challenge that they needed to do ECMO. So a team of surgeons and doctors and machines, one of the most amazing things you'll ever see, because God gave us that too, did that for 5.5 days. I think he was on ECMO. They expected him to be 10 to 12 days. They prepared us for 2 full weeks of this ECMO, and he surprised the heck out of all of them and was out of there in 5.5 days.
Yeah. And I don't think there's ever, like, the moment when you're waiting for a surgeon to come in and tell you what happened during that surgery, I don't think there's ever a moment of relief that, unless you've experienced it, to know what that feels like.
It went very well.
And just the incredible talent that God has given people to gift them to, in a tiny infant's neck, to pump out his blood, put oxygen into it, and pump it back into him. It's just, we're so incredibly thankful for that side of it. And I think that's where parents struggle so much in this medical world, is you have people that have saved your child's life, and then you have a difference of opinion from them. And I think that's where the biggest struggle comes from, is you're so grateful. Without them, your child would not be alive.
And to his prognosis, that was, I'd say, the stuff with the PPHN and ECMO and all these medical terms that have to do with his heart and his lung trouble. That was not my biggest concern. I knew, you could look up and you could see, holy cow, God has made these amazing surgeries and machines and doctors who can put these fires out and help that stuff. But because his brain damage was so much, both before ECMO, during ECMO, he had multiple EEGs, so brain scans and MRIs as well. And they both clearly showed severe, there's no other word for it, severe brain damage and burst suppression. So he had tons of damage on multiple areas of damage that could be seen on MRI. And then he had a burst suppression on his EEG, which I can picture the exact place I was when I started to read that research that night after we got that first EEG report. And burst suppression, the level he had and the cause of his being that physical birth trauma, he had only a 20% chance of living past age 1. And what they told us was, if he makes it to 1 and beyond, it's a 99%. And they were only saying that because it would have just sounded inhuman to say 100%, which is what they meant. 99% chance of cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism. What actually ended up happening, though, through the burst suppression, through the EEGs, and through the terrible neurological prognosis he faced medically, according to their interpretations of how this works. It actually was our window into getting through and getting out, because then we sought out second opinions from different epileptologists and neurologists who I had already made partnerships and started to do collaborative work with, which is what the world needs, is not medicine or neurologically focused chiropractic, but medicine and neurologically focused chiropractic, in whatever order that comes in for your family. We need both, one for emergencies and one for health restoration, which is what Oliver needed. So that path they kind of put us on set us to where we needed to be, to work with what I knew from a neurologically focused brain-based chiropractic concepts, to talk with Dr. Rossi and with Dr. Michael Smith and Nancy Monica and say, do you guys think the body could heal from the inside out if we get this stress off his body and we activate his vagus nerve? What's his chiropractic prognosis? And that's where Dr. Cody surrounded us. So many people in our circle really came in and supported me from the chiropractic side and said, if you already are getting 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids better in the clinic who have epilepsy and autism and had a traumatic birth, if their brains heal 19 years later, why would Oliver's 9 days old not be capable of the most amount of healing you've ever seen? And so that became the plan. And then that became his outcome. He left the hospital on the dot at 6 weeks. I remember it was so he was born on Memorial Day, and he came home on 4th of July weekend, because I remember the fireworks and it was our anniversary, or the day before. So he came home and we did all that. And I specifically remember for his case just how important it was to do exactly that, just be done with it. But when he left the NICU, his EEG became perfectly clear. So his last EEG in the hospital was clear. All the burst suppression was gone. All the seizure activity was gone. And his MRI was completely clear. Yeah. His EKGs had gotten much, much better. We had to do a follow-up with that at 6 and 12 months. Yeah. And so one thing he battled with, his
digestion and everything came back online without doing any of the medications.
One thing that was Oliver's battle, his one remaining battle, his first 2-3 years of life, was croup. Because he had such a tough start with his lungs. Like, if we'd have followed the medical path and you fought, you nursed, we'd adjust, you would nurse, I would adjust, you would nurse, I would adjust. Had we stayed in the medical system, he would have had more of that. And then he would have had antibiotics, and then he would have had steroids, and we would have taken an already, kind of tough to get off the ground and get going immune system and respiratory system, and we would have squashed it further, which is what medicine does. And he'd be asthmatic, and he'd be allergies, and he'd be the chronically sick kiddo. And he is anything but. He is recently turned 14 years old and runs a 5.5 minute mile, and literally runs 4 or 5 miles every single day, shoots hundreds of baskets. He's 5'10". He's jacked. He's got 3 sisters. He's the nicest, kindest, humblest, helpful kid in the world. And every part of his life is really just what God has planned for our kiddos, which is, he's living it.
I remember when he was actually in the hospital, and one of my friends that I met through a birthing class told me, thank God who his dad is. And I remember at the time being upset, because I was like, why would you say that's a good thing? Like, why would you say that just because Tony's a chiropractor? But it wasn't until the hindsight and looking back on it that I know absolutely Oliver's story is our true north and the true north of pediatric chiropractic, because we have seen that miracle with our own eyes. And through his miracle, we've seen so many other miracles where there are times that I think to myself still, can it be chiropractic? I still think that to myself, and I still wonder about it. And then God will place another miracle right in front of me and just continues to say, yes, it is. It really is. It is. And I think it's such a great thing looking back on and seeing the only difference in Oliver's story was chiropractic. His story was even worse than a lot of those babies that were in pods. His EEG was worse than a lot of those babies in the pods. And his health right now is 100%. And the only thing that Oliver had was chiropractic. And I just remember when, we'd be sitting in there and we would just be praying and begging. Honestly, there's no other word other than begging for his life and for him to be saved. And just thinking of what would we owe if we could have Oliver, what would we owe if God saved him? And I know it doesn't work that way, but I think to that time all the time. And with everything we have, we want to give back to every parent that feels hopeless in that situation and in that moment, and give them the one thing that Oliver had that we know got him to where he is at now. And just every parent deserves that, to know that they have that option, to know that they can ask questions, to know that pediatric chiropractic exists, because we're still living in a time where most people don't know that pediatric chiropractic exists and how it can help. And I just think of, if my son had that as the only difference that gives him the life that he has now, it is time to change that and time to bring it out into the world, so you have a choice.
When we get tired, Oliver's like that recharging station, and you just look at him and you get it used to be a long hug. Now it's a bro hug with Oliver too, because he's my bro. And it's all you need. It's all you need to go find that next mom, to go write that next article, to go deal hope to that next mom on a consultation by listening first, empowering second, and then explaining and saying, hey, this is what we can do. This is how this works to get your child out of the storm. There is an absolute network of pediatric chiropractors called the PX Docs Network, which is now God has assembled alongside of us. What I do know that wasn't there when Oliver was born is there's just more of us. Yeah. There's more of us who are called to it, who are ready for it, who are trained for it. And I'm so glad there's more PX docs than ever before. We built an army of chiropractors who care enough to go into that storm with you and put our arm around you and guide you through it, guide you out of it through education, through empowerment, and through adjustments. And if I hadn't had that education, that empowerment, that it works from my mentors, that had me ready for Oliver's outcome isn't this. So I just ended up being his chiropractor, and so what you got to do here, moms and dads, is you got to find your chiropractor for your kiddo. And your chiropractor is a hope dealer. Your chiropractor is as scientifically nerdy as it can possibly get. You don't even know, especially if they're in our network. And you need to just know how much they care. You need to know exactly the science and the awesomeness behind what the adjustment and adjustments do. And that practice too, they'll build a community around you and they'll support you in every step of the way. And what'll blow your mind, as it did with ours with Oliver, it just works. The number one way that Oliver impacted me for sure in becoming a just full out force for pediatric chiropractic is just trusting the process of how healing happens. So the way God designed us is the nervous system is the boss. The nervous system controls and coordinates everything. So whether it is the respiratory and cardiac system, or it's the brain, or it's the gut, or it's the immune system, you can't get any of that back online and better until you get the nervous system online first. So what it's done for us is it's really focused us on this profession, neurologically focused chiropractors. We fix, restore, repair one thing, and it's the most important thing that sets up success of everything else. So that's really just that neuro-focused chiropractic. Everything needs to start there, no matter a child's condition, because that's where health really originates from.
When Oliver came home from the hospital, he was in early intervention, and I'll never forget that the first time, because I think it was a few weeks from the time he came home before early intervention came, and they looked at his paperwork, obviously, before his home visit. And when they met Oliver, they didn't believe it was Oliver. And they asked us all of these different questions on his paperwork, because they were expecting to see a completely different baby, struggling a lot more than he was struggling. And we didn't do anything other than continue just adjusting, baby wearing him, loving him, and fully believing in that hope of what his life was going to look like, instead of believing what they told us his life was going to look like. The number one thing that I have learned throughout this whole process is that I am their mom, and I am the one that is responsible for all decisions when it comes to my children. And I know more than I think I know. I think that's the hardest thing as parents is we think that somebody is smarter than us. A doctor knows more than us. Somebody knows bigger words than us, so they must know what's better for our kids than us. And that's not true. We know what is best for our kids because we are their mom. God selected us to be their mom, to protect them, to know what is best for them. And it took a really long, hard journey for me to believe in that power of being their mom. But it is by far the biggest thing that has carried me through what we went through with Oliver and so many things beyond in life is that we are their mom.
All right, parents, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our story about our miracle man, Oliver. Our hope is that whatever season this finds you in, no matter what your children are struggling with, whether you're in the NICU going through this right now, or you're 2 decades since your NICU experience and still searching for those answers and drug-free action steps to help your child thrive and meet their optimal potential, we hope that Oliver's story served you well in getting that path found and getting action into that direction. We were so grateful to know so much of the science and obviously to have already been a neurologically focused pediatric chiropractor that understands both the principles and the action steps of chiropractic and how it facilitates and creates just a level of neurological healing that nothing else out there does. And to be able to apply that early for Oliver, you can now see why we're so passionate, why I bring so much energy into the episodes and so much just energy and action into everything we do. This is exactly what the Experience Miracles podcast is all about, reaching millions and millions of kids and families. And you better believe we need hope first. As I was going through that, as you heard, I needed to call my mentors, my friends. I needed someone to tell me it's possible. Oliver can heal. Medicine will save his life, and chiropractic will restore it. Get to work. Every day I needed to talk to my mentors like Dr. Cody and hear that message. So that's why this message of the Experience Miracles podcast won't stop with one episode. That's why our social media doesn't stop with one post, or our website doesn't stop with one article. We will constantly keep restoring and rebuilding your hope and then empowering you with the information and the resources and the connections to our PX doctors to get that healing started. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform. We would love so much if you tuned in every single week. It's so exciting to us, even on my own phone when I see these pop in there. And I know that we're going to find some mom, some kids, some Kristina, some Tony, some Oliver somewhere, and be able to use this platform and this podcast to have you then, those families, those kiddos, experience those transformative miracles. And please be sure to share this podcast with anyone in your life who needs this and needs to know that hope, answers, and drug-free help exists and is out there, and this podcast can help them find it. We are motivated every single day by this phrase, every kid counts. So every podcast, every share, every subscription counts. We love you. We appreciate you. We'll see you next week, parents.